Never before had an alleged witch been murdered in cold blood in order to break a curse, and not since medieval Europe and the witch trials of Salem, Massachusetts, had serious thought been given to witchcraft and the occult, and never before had the people who killed a witch been brought to trial for murder. Now, this excerpt is not of old 1800s frontier murder tales. This was written in an account of 3 1929 murder trials in Pennsylvania. The year was 1928. It was the time of peace after the end of World War I a decade prior, and the U.S. economy had not yet taken the nosedive into the start of the Great Depression. In short, it was a good year, except for John Blymeyer. His wife left him, 2 of his 3 kids died, he couldn't hold a job, and he spent his days wandering the countryside with witches in hot pursuit at his heels. Or so he believed. You see, John believed he possessed witch powers that stretched back generations through his family. This belief was further fueled by his parents' belief that he was cursed. As his father said, "One of my daughters died. She was well anyway. There was something the matter with the head, and I am that way too, sometimes. John was sick too and couldn't work, and there was something's the matter with his head." Now, most people today do not immediately leap from head trouble to witchcraft, and neither did doctors. John spent part of the 1920s in a state mental hospital that he left in violation of a commitment order that put him there. So, wandering the area of York, Pennsylvania, and beset by hallucinations and delusions that stretched from days to weeks or years, John searched for any relief and turned to powwow doctors. Now, powwow has a more specific definition than witchcraft. Some books trace it back to the Algonquin tribe in Massachusetts, using it for medicine men. More modern books describe it as a blend of Oriental mysticism, folklore, and biblical faith healing. As to the word hex, I do use it interchangeably with curse here, as you'll see. But some people in this world use hex for a variety of meanings, such as a combination of superstition, witchcraft, medieval demonology, and primitive religion. And now every powwow doctor John saw agreed with his own suggestion that he had been hexed. And then one, Emma Knoll, took it further. She had him perform a ritual over a dollar bill in order to picture the man who had hexed him. When he said he saw Nelson Rhymeyer, Emma shrieked, "This is the man!" Emma then gave John a formula to break the curse. A lock of Nelson's hair from the top of his head and a book, The Long-Lost Friend, needed to be buried 6 feet down behind the barn. So John set out to break his curse, and he didn't do it alone. While working as a cigar maker, he befriended John Curry, an orphan teenager, and together they crossed paths with Milton Hess, a farmer suffering the plight of bad crop weather and family illness. However, it would be Wilbert Hess, an 18-year-old, who helped John carry out his plans. As for Nelson, he wasn't some stranger. He occasionally employed John as a day laborer to help harvest potatoes. However, he was also a recluse after his wife left him. He lived in a secluded hollow and was reputed to have witch powers that he'd used to solve problems for neighbors. In short, he came across as that mysterious neighbor everyone whispers about. On the evening of November 27, 1928, John, Curry, and Hess, armed with 25 feet of rope, hitched a ride from Hess's brother Clayton to the Rhymeyer Hollow. Clayton left immediately after the men got out of the car. John woke Nelson with a story about having lost one of his books and asking if he'd seen it. Initially, the 3 men merely jumped Nelson and began tying him up in order to cut his hair, a fact they didn't tell the victim. Nelson fought them, which led to the 3 kicking him and hitting him over the head with a piece of wood, which was probably nearby firewood in the house. Then the reasons changed. John demanded Nelson hand over his money, which he did. With Nelson now tied up, Hess told John 3 times to cut the man's hair. John ignored him and told Curry to put the rope around Nelson's neck. Then he told Curry to choke him, which the teen did. Curry wanted to take Nelson's shotgun afterwards, but Hess vetoed the idea. Meanwhile, John went rooting through drawers for more money before telling the others to set the house on fire to avoid suspicion, before hauling the body up a hill to the barn. Once they reached the barn, John then turned back to find a bag in the corn shed. At this point, Hess thought someone was coming up the road, so the 3 murderers abandoned the curse-breaking plan and walked back to Hess's house, where they split up. The crime would go undiscovered till Thanksgiving Day, when a neighbor investigated the noises of Nelson's unattended livestock. The house and body had not burned completely, so the murder was quickly discovered. All 3 suspects were quickly taken into custody, and trials occurred in the beginning of 1929. Amid newspaper hysteria over powwow doctors and superstitions, all 3 had confessed to the murder before the trials, a fact that caused public friction when defense attorneys were appointed anyway. During the trial, it was determined that John's real motive was robbery, and that he had used the story of a curse as a method to dupe his accomplices into committing the crime. A poor choice for him, considering Nelson had little money after a tough crop year. Worse, a doctor declared him sane and fit for a trial where no plea deal was offered. The first North American witchcraft trials in 200 years opened on January 6, 1929 in York, Pennsylvania, though the charge was for murder. John was tried first. The 2 teenagers were tried afterwards. In each trial, the witnesses, including the victim's widow and Hess's brother, each made mention of curses and curse breaking as the reason behind the crime. Naturally, the press went wild with it. Every headline mentioned hexes, witches, and occasionally made it sound like the legal defense wanted to use the curse as a justifiable reason for murder. In short, it was very sensationalist. In reality, for Bleimeyer, they tried to plead insanity, claiming he was an 8-year-old boy in a grown man's body. However, the defense stated that this was not the same sort of insanity plea as is typical. Instead, they put heavy emphasis on John Bleimeyer's childhood, being surrounded by talk of powwow and witchcraft, and made it sound as if childhood beliefs clouded his judgment. I cannot tell you if that would ever be considered an actual insanity plea or not, as I am not a lawyer. What I can say is that the verdict was guilty. John and Curry were found guilty of first-degree murder. Hess was found guilty of second-degree. Years later, there were rumors that the trials were rushed and only lasted 6 days because the judge was in league with York political establishment to quiet down the embarrassment of a murder claimed to be caused by witchcraft. I cannot tell you how true or not that may be. What I can tell you of the aftermath of the murder and trials is what became of John, Curry, and Hess. John's sentence was commuted 27 years later, and he became a night watchman in Philadelphia before retiring in 1965. He died as a recluse in 1972. Curry was sent to a state reformatory and released after 10 years. He received a special dispensation from FDR to serve in the U.S. military in World War II, where he became a cartographer on General Eisenhower's staff and helped draft plans for the Normandy invasion. He went on to become a painter and livestock farmer after the war. Hess, despite receiving the verdict of second-degree murder, is the only one to have served his entire sentence. After 10 years, he was released and faded into obscurity before dying in 1978. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this foray into the past, leave a like or a comment. If you want more, you can subscribe and check out the other videos on the channel, as there's always more history.